The current situation in Moscow is challenging, although not as dire as in Ukrainian villages frequently targeted by shelling and drones. However, for the first time in the war, the Russian people are experiencing what it's like to live in a country under attack, and this response could have grave consequences for Putin. Recently, drones struck wealthy neighborhoods in Moscow, causing injuries and raising concerns. The May 30th attack, described as the most dangerous on the capital since World War II, involved unidentified drones flying into Moscow. Surprisingly, these drones were unarmed and did not carry explosive payloads. Instead, they deliberately crashed into buildings, unsettling the affluent residents. This realization shook Moscow's elites as they understood that the attack involved suicide drones solely fueled by their onboard fuel, causing minor fires. If these drones had been armed with their usual high-explosive bombs, the damage and casualties could have been severe. The unarmed nature of the drones raises numerous questions. People are eager to know why these specific targets were hit, how the drones managed to penetrate deep into Russian territory, why Russian air defenses failed, and how this high-profile attack on the capital will affect Putin personally. Russian state news has tightly controlled information about the drone attack, resorting to strict censorship reminiscent of the Cold War era. The Wagner Group, for instance, is now banned from Russian news due to a conflict between Prigozhin and the Ministry of Defense. Given the restrictive information flow, Western sources have relied on official statements, internal Russian social media, and eyewitness accounts to reconstruct the events. Currently, 3 verified drone strikes have been reported, targeting a residential building on the outskirts of Moscow, a high-rise apartment block, and another high-rise building. Additionally, a video captured a drone flying over a wealthy suburb. According to Russian reports, their newly installed Panzer air defense batteries in central Moscow intercepted 5 drones, while other countermeasures were used to bring down additional drones. Although the suspected origin of the attack is Ukrainian, the drones used do not resemble the widely used UJ-22 drone. Instead, they had distinct features such as a different fuselage, wheel positioning, and wing design. Drone experts who analyzed video footage estimated that these drones had a range of tens to hundreds of kilometers, suggesting they could have been launched from inside Ukraine. However, Ukraine has denied involvement in the attack, although some individuals on social media have noted similarities between the drones and Ukraine's indigenous Beaver drone, designed for long-range attacks. While Russia has experienced over 60 drone attacks since 2023, most of them occurred in the Bryansk and Belgorod regions, as well as occupied Crimea. Given their proximity to the invasion theater or direct support to it, these territories were logical targets for Ukraine. The recent attack on Moscow, along with the attempt to target the Kremlin's Russian flag on May 3, represents bold and long-range drone attacks. The extensive range of the drones raises doubts about their origin. Despite Russia's relatively strong ground-based air defense capabilities, including a robust air defense network, it has proven ineffective in protecting military airfields and even its own capital from drone attacks. Ukraine, with a high interception rate of around 90%, has successfully targeted Moscow multiple times, highlighting the apparent shortcomings of Russia's air defenses. The lack of transparency regarding these vulnerabilities makes it difficult to ascertain the reasons behind the failures. Common sense suggests that these drones must have been launched from inside Russian territory to avoid early detection. However, it is perplexing that Russia's air defense systems, including radar activation and fuel availability, have been inconsistent. Even flying at low altitudes, the drone should have been easily detected and intercepted by Russian defenses. Yet, the drones have penetrated deep into Russian territory, leaving observers in the dark about the exact reasons behind these security breaches. One can argue that the drone's origin might be internal, considering the need to evade detection until the last moment. However, it is disconcerting that Russia's air defense cruiser, the Moskva, was destroyed by aging anti-ship missiles, despite being designed to protect the Black Sea Fleet. There is speculation that the cruiser's air defense radars were not fully operational. Additionally, evidence shows that Russian air defense radars were intentionally turned off by the air defense vehicle crews, shortly before being targeted by Bayraktar drones. Furthermore, aircraft wreckage has been discovered with maintenance or safety pins in positions that would have rendered their radars inoperable. In conclusion, the current situation in Moscow reflects a challenging period, although not as severe as the plight of Ukrainians in targeted villages. The recent drone attack on wealthy neighborhoods has alarmed the city's elites. Unarmed drones deliberately crashed into buildings, raising questions about their origins, the failures of Russian air defenses, and the potential impact on Putin. Strict censorship by Russian state news has limited information, leaving Western sources to gather details through official statements, social media, and eyewitness accounts. Despite Russia's robust ground-based air defense network, it has been unable to protect military installations and even its capital from drone attacks. The exact reasons behind these failures remain unclear, leaving observers in the dark about the vulnerabilities within Russia's air defense systems. So, as we mentioned earlier, it's impossible to use Occam's razor to conclude that the drones were likely launched close to their targets. It's surprising that air defense crews are still performing poorly, even at this stage of the war. However, it's also not surprising that Russia left its border unsecured, which allowed anti-Putin Russian partisan groups to occupy the Belgorod region for 48 hours. Russia claims that Ukrainian saboteurs infiltrated Russia and launched the drones near Moscow. Ukraine, on the other hand, denies these allegations. The fact that the drones were unarmed, though, suggests that Russia might be correct for once. However, given the nature of Russia, another possibility arises. It's possible that Ukraine was indeed behind the attack, using unarmed drones to crash into buildings. This theory aligns with Ukraine's awareness that its Western partners would disapprove of attacking Russia, especially with deadly weapons. Moreover, using explosive suicide drones against civilian targets would constitute a war crime, which Ukraine has been careful to avoid in order to maintain moral high ground and Western support. This has caused frustration among many Ukrainians who feel that they should be able to retaliate, while adhering to EU and NATO rules. The fact that affluent Moscow neighborhoods were targeted also supports the theory of Ukraine's involvement. These areas are inhabited by Moscow's elite, and the attack may have been intended to unsettle them. Surprisingly, after the attack, many regular Russians celebrated it. They viewed it as targeting wealthy elites who exploit the Russian people. The celebration gained significant traction, prompting Russian military bloggers to call for unity in condemning the attacks and emphasizing that we're all Russians. However, only one specific group has been exempt from fighting in the war so far. The evidence seems to point towards Kiev as the responsible party, but Russian politics introduces two alternate scenarios that are equally plausible. One consequence of the attack is the embarrassment not only for Moscow but also for Putin himself. The attack on the Kremlin on May 3 shook Russia to its core, and the occupation of the Belgorod region by anti-Putin groups brought the war home to ordinary Russians. Footage of civilians fleeing and Russian prisoners being captured spread rapidly on social media, even as the official Russian media pretended that everything was fine. The inability to ensure safety within Russia reflects poorly on Putin's leadership. The recent drone attack further intensifies pressure on the autocratic leader, and there are those who would like to see him ousted from power. Prigozhin, leader of the Wagner Group, has played a curious role in the war. While initially favored by Putin, his relationship with the leader deteriorated as Wagner's failures and losses escalated. Prigozhin clashed with Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, and Chief of General Staff Army General Valery Gerasimov, possibly in an attempt to replace them. The feud resulted in Russian casualties and conflicts between the military and Wagner. There are rumors that Wagner even leaked information on Russian generals and senior officers to Ukraine, enabling them to target them with strikes. Throughout this period, Prigozhin remained one of Putin's trusted associates, but their relationship seemed strained as the Battle of Bakhmut continued. It was reported that Prigozhin offered detailed information on Russian military positions to Ukrainian intelligence in exchange for allowing Wagner to take Bakhmut. Wagner would gain glory while Ukraine could inflict significant damage on the Russian military. Although Prigozhin denies this report, it suggests that he prioritizes his own interests. If true, it would lend credibility to the theory that Prigozhin and Wagner themselves launched the drone attacks in Moscow. Such an attack would embarrass the military, which many in Russia consider the real heroes of the war. It would also undermine Putin's political position, especially since the drones targeted the rich and elite who pose a potential threat to Putin. However, the absence of explosive payloads weakens this theory. If Prigozhin truly aimed to provoke the elite, causing casualties would have been more effective than merely frightening them with crashing drones. The lack of explosive payloads leads to a third theory, a Russian false flag attack. Popular support for the war remains strong within Russia but is gradually declining. Putin understands that to have any chance of winning, he needs full mobilization of the country. However, this would be political suicide unless he can make Russians angry or scared enough to support the ongoing war. If the attack was orchestrated domestically, it would explain how the drones evaded Russian air defenses and were launched close enough to penetrate deep into Moscow. Russia has a history of considering war crimes against its own citizens as a valid political tool. Unfortunately, voting doesn't count in Russia, but dead bodies hold greater significance in mobilizing popular support. However, the targets chosen contradict this theory. By apparently targeting wealthy and politically elite Muscovites, Putin would not accomplish much in motivating the rest of Russian society to support the war. The fact that many Russians celebrated the drone strikes is evidence of this. A false flag attack would only undermine Putin's control over the elite. Nevertheless, it's not entirely impossible that this was still a false flag attack. Putin has acted on flawed intelligence before, launching this war based on misconceptions about Ukraine's willingness to fight and the state of Russia's military. His intelligence services may have provided inaccurate information about targeting wealthy elites, inadvertently angering them against the regime instead of garnering further support. Ultimately, the drone attack was likely carried out by Ukraine or a Russian partisan group with direct Ukrainian support. We may never know the full truth until the war concludes and classified intelligence is shared to document the invasion of Ukraine.